Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight on this latest episode of our newest show. We are talking about all 32 projects leading up to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, going through the MCU. We are talking about Captain America, the First Avenger on this episode of the Rewatch. So, Max, what are your thoughts?
Um, it is a good film, and it is very much a enjoyable film to watch over. I'm trying to avoid saying rewatch too many times while we're on this, but
We'll just play the graphic every time we say the word rewatch.
it is for sure a film that I could sit down and just enjoy, right? And it doesn't even need to be a special occasion. I can just pick it out of a hat and I'd be totally fine watching it again. It has great character development, and it
In more ways than one.
in more ways than one. But then you get this really great portrayal of Captain America, Steve Rogers, from Chris Evans, who is just this Boy Scout of a person. And just as Stanley Tucci's character in the film says, basically what he says is that it's more important to be a good man than a good soldier. And Steve Rogers he is a good man. He is doing what he's told, but he's doing it for the right reasons. He doesn't like bullies. And what better reason is there to exist than to eliminate bullies from the world? Of course, that's a gross simplification of the actual reasons, but
it's an oversimplification. It's an oversimplification of events, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I love Chris Evans. I love every film he's done. He's one of my favorite actors working today. So that comes from my experience watching this movie and his other performances in the MCU.
Yeah.
Because that's obviously where I've been exposed to him the most. The character is just there's so much to Captain America in the comics history that to bring him to the screen is a tall order. And yet, Joe Johnston, the director, and Evans, through his performance, are able to tell a Captain America origin story in a way that really, really works as a motion picture. I don't think that an origin story for this character, as he was going to be portrayed in the MCU, could have worked in another way. Obviously, we haven't seen the other ways, the other options, if there were any. But as a way, we talked about it yesterday with Thor, as a way of introducing the character. While this isn't my favorite origin story in the MCU, it might be the best.
Yeah, I think I would probably agree with that. I'd have to sit down and sort of go through them, and I know we have different definitions of what constitutes an origin story. But anyways, moving on to my next point, which is let me bring you to some of the scenes within the movie, and I'm mostly thinking of those highly montagey and almost propaganda-like cuts that were thrown in there. I'm thinking specifically of the when Steve Rogers, Captain America, first sort of is performing his what he would call his monkey dance for the troops overseas, and singing and dancing and fake punching a fake Hitler.
Knocked out Adolf Hitler 200 times.
Yes, 200 times. And he, it just, like, the music that was playing in the background, it felt very much like I could see it as a war propaganda film. And that's just something that I was thinking of when I saw it again for this. And then the other scene I was thinking about was how that was kind of juxtaposed against him actually going into war once he became Captain America, the fighter, and not the performer.
And going after the Hydra bases.
And going after the Hydra bases. So those were two things that I wanted to point out and wanted to get your thoughts on, George.
Yeah. So here we see in the first, I'll go one at a time with what you just said.
Sure.
In the first montage, when you're seeing Steve Rogers sort of getting his feet wet in this new physical form, not doing what he expected he would be doing. And so I think Chris Evans gives a really good performance of Steve out of his comfort zone. You know, he's up on stage, he's, you know, reading out this this propaganda. It is propaganda. You know, every bond you buy is a bullet in the barrel of your best guy's gun, is a direct quote from 200 performances across the US. And I think that, as you said, is perfectly juxtaposed against Steve in his element, going after the Hydra bases, because it's what he signed up to do.
Yeah.
And so that's a really nice comparison that you made, because it does show that he is, first of all, he's a good man for being willing to go along with the monkey dance, as you said. But then when he's going after the Hydra bases, he's the other side of Erskine's coin, the perfect soldier. So yeah, that's a really good comparison.
Yeah, but you know, as he does that, he still hasn't lost the right motivation, right? Because even when he's doing his little dance for the soldiers and in the movie theaters and everything, it's to help the war effort.
Yeah.
You know, it's to help the United States, and you know that's also a thing that I think we should talk about. It's impossible to escape is, you know, the conversation that we should have about, you know, patriotism versus nationalism, and what Steve Rogers and what Captain America represents to whoever watches these films. I think both can be drawn out of it. I think you can make an argument that he is a patriotic character, but I also think you can make a case, especially in this film specifically, that he is a nationalist character. But you know that those through lines continue within the MCU in all of Captain America's appearances. It gets a little more convoluted after Winter Soldier, which we'll get into, but at least for now, it is really interesting to think about.
Well said. So right now I want to talk about the cast, because as is the case with a lot of these phase 1 films, we're meeting all of these characters for the first time. And I'm not just talking about Neil McDonough as Dum Dum Dugan. So
you weren't just talking. I thought that's what we are going to spend our time on.
I mean, we get Stanley Tucci and Tommy Lee Jones as Dr. Erskine and Colonel Phillips. They're one-offs in the MCU. Great performances, great actors, one-offs. Then we get Sebastian Stan, Bucky Barnes, Haley Atwell, Peggy Carter. You know, these characters that are going to be with Steve Rogers in some way, shape, or form throughout his trilogy and throughout the MCU. So I'm curious specifically about those two, because other than the one-offs that I just mentioned, they're probably second and third in prominence to Steve Rogers. So what do you think of what Seb and Haley did in this film?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it, you know, is actually fantastic the way that they are characterized and the way that they're set up in this film because of their impact on Steve throughout the MCU. I think Steve is the kind of guy, the cliche kind of guy that doesn't need a lot of friends, just needs a few good ones. And Peggy Carter, Bucky Barnes, Erskine, and then eventually Sam Wilson, those are the people that are closest to Steve Rogers forever, like throughout his entire life and throughout his entire career as Captain America. They are the people that are his guiding light and who shape a lot of his decision making, for better or for worse. And I think, he depends on them. There wasn't a lot of stability in his life. The most stable thing about him was getting frozen for 75 years. And so he needed that. And I think they provided that without even necessarily instructing him telling him what to do. They were just there. They were present in his life. And that's what matters. And that's what mattered to him. And that's why I think he is a great character. He doesn't depend on the United States. He depends on the people that are closest to him. I think he loves the structure, and he loves the United States. I'm not going to deny that, but he cares more about the people close to him.
Yeah, and it's on the strength of performances by Sebastian Stan, who is probably, until The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, this is probably his best performance in the MCU. As, an actor. You talk about it when he's the Winter Soldier in the second film, and that's really great physical acting, that's really great emotion, but in terms of actor delivering lines, really strong performance, considering Winter Soldier only has like 7 lines or something like that. I don't know. We haven't rewatched that one yet.
Something like that.
And of course, Haley Atwell is Peggy Carter. First time, other than, you see it a little bit with Pepper and with Betty Ross and Jane Foster. This is the first real, this is the love of my life in the MCU. Tony and Pepper weren't there yet in the first 2 Iron Man films.
Yep. Also, she plays the biggest and most important and impactful role on the main character.
Yeah.
She has a huge impact on what Steve does, just in this film, not even talking about her other appearances or existence within the MCU. She's huge in this film.
Really is.
Yeah.
One last casting question to ask you before we get into our ratings and rankings. It's the best villain we've seen thus far, Hugo Weaving as the Red Skull. I mean, what can we say about his performance that hasn't already been said, right?
I'm remaining silent. But
that's as good an answer as anything, though.
Seriously, he's fantastic. He's got that diabolical look in his eyes, and then he delivers his lines with such intensity, and it's intimidating, right? Nazis are already intimidating, and then he takes off his mask and he's this deformed, honestly, devil from hell type character that is.
It helps that when he takes off his skin mask, for lack of a better term, there is fire there.
Yeah.
There's an explosion going on at the base.
Yeah.
So devil from hell, that's apt. Maybe he was Mephisto all along.
Oh, goodness. We're not going to get into this right now.
I just wish that Hugo Weaving had come back. I mean, Ross Marquand does a great job in Infinity War and Endgame. Yeah. I wish Hugo Weaving had come back. And I wish that we could have seen Steve Rogers returning the stones, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
All right. So you want to toss some ratings and rankings?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Again, everything I said still stands. This is a great film. Introduction to Steve Rogers. So I'm going to give it an 80. It is a solid B- film. There's a lot to like. I think there are a lot of different ways that it could have gone to maybe make it better, but it did what the film, I think, was supposed to do. And so this falls in my top 20. It is number 20 out of 32. And yeah, I mean, it only gets better from here with the Captain America movies. So we're excited to watch those movies again. Anyways, George, over to you.
You're right in that it does get better from here. And that's pretty hard to do with how I see this film. this rewatch moved it up in my MCU list,
Hmm.
which I think is a testament to the strength of the filmmakers, the actors, the story. So I'm going to put it as my favorite MCU film of the 5 we've rewatched, and I'm going to put it 15th out of the 32 projects.
Okay.
Top half, definitely, for me at least. I just love the characterization of Steve Rogers, the origin story element of it. It feels like a World War II film at times, which you don't get a lot of that in superhero movies other than with Captain America. And as for a 0 to 100 score, I love Steve Rogers. I love his story. 85. I don't think it could go any higher than that. There are some flaws to this film. I don't think it could go much lower than that. Like I said, it rose up on this rewatch. And now that
Great.
I've said the word rewatch about 1,000 times in this episode, that's going to wrap up this one. We will be back tomorrow. We are going to be talking about the first time we see all of these heroes appear on screen together. So thank you all for joining us. We will be back with the Avengers. Good night.
Good night.